Okay, attendee numbers are ticking up. It's a good sign. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're in the right place. Water Resources East launch of our emerging water resources management plan. Obviously, we'll wait for a few minutes just to let people join us. We're up to about 80 attendees already. And hopefully we may break the 100 barrier. I'll explain this in more detail in a moment, as well as obviously introduce myself and the team as we get to that stage of the presentation. But just to flag that, first of all, we're using Slido for questions and answers. Nancy will explain that in more detail in a moment. But the chat is open if you did want to, or first of all, have any technical queries that Nancy can help you answer. And also, just to start off with, it'd be great to let us know, who you are, what organisation you represent, and maybe also where you're dialing in from this morning. So yeah, use the chat just to say hello and to get the conversation going.
Nice to see some regulars.
Got some regulars, yeah.
Yeah, got some regulars.
Some names I definitely recognise. There's obviously lots that I don't. So we'll just leave it a few more minutes whilst people join us. We're well over 100 now.
Oh, fantastic. 127.
We've got quite a few people lined up as panelists as well, who will bring in to answer particular questions if they come up. And obviously we'll introduce them as they come on. Okay, just leave it one more minute and then we can kick off, I think. Got a really nice mix of people online this morning. Fantastic. That's a good question from Wendy. So why don't we show who's online, Nancy? Do we have that function?
Not on the webinar, but what we can do afterwards when we circulate the slides and the recording is we can circulate an attendee list, an organisation attendee list for everyone.
Yeah. We'll try and do that for you, Wendy. Okay, we've got 126 plus 13 in the panel, so fantastic turnout. Thanks very much. Let's get going. It's coming up towards 5 past. Obviously, we've only got 90 minutes or so for our webinar this morning and lots to cover. And I should introduce myself first of all. Well, I'm delighted to be launching this webinar 2 weeks after we published the Emerging Water Resources Plan for Eastern England. My name is Daniel Johns. I'm the new Managing Director of Water Resources East, obviously taking over from Robin Price, say 2 weeks ago. Perfect timing on the morning of the regional plans from across England being launched. Some of you may know me from previous roles. So I've been kind of working on environmental policy for almost 20 years now, primarily at DEFRA, working on a whole range of different relevant policy areas from climate change and the environment. Lots of time working on flood risk management, the Flood and Water Management Act. I spent 4 years at the Climate Change Committee, so the independent advisors to the government on both mitigating climate change, reducing UK emissions, but also my role was to head up the adaptation team. So we supported the Adaptation Committee wrote their reports, their statutory reports to Parliament on progress in preparing the country for climate change. And also my team produced the second climate change risk assessment published by Parliament to Parliament in 2017. Also spent time back at the department working on agriculture policy, health and harmony, and the early stages of the Agriculture Act, before then joining Anglian Water to head up their national policy work in Parliament and in Westminster. And as part of that, I chair the steering group for the UK Water Efficiency Strategy Steering Group, which is obviously the forum sponsored and supported by WaterWise, that brings together all the kind of experts together with government to try and push forward on demand management and water efficiency. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in this role. I think it's an absolutely fantastic role to be part of. It's a great team that I've inherited. And I'm really looking forward to working with our obviously board members, our wider membership, and the whole team to take forward our emerging plan over the next few months to the next formal iteration. In terms of an agenda today, so we've got 90 minutes, quick introductions here before we talk about, we'll turn to the emerging resources, the emerging water resources regional plan is the main kind of subject this morning. But I want to make sure you've got an opportunity to give you an update on the various flagship projects that we have also been taking forward with partners over recent months. So we'll talk about catchment level planning, things like the systematic conservation planning work and other projects as they're coming together, and how they feed back into the regional water resources plan. Hopefully we'll leave plenty of time for questions and answers. And of course, the emerging plan is open for consultations until the end of February. And therefore, we'll give you a reminder toward the end of the session exactly how you can respond to the consultation. So I encourage you to tweet about the events using the Water R East hashtag, rather the accounts, and obviously you can use the hashtag emerging plan. And Nancy, if I bring you in at this point just to explain the chat and the Q&A function.
Yes, so we're using Slido today for all Q&As. So please, if you have any questions, don't put them in the chat because they're bound to get lost. I'm going to be using chat to share with you useful links to documents and web pages, etc. So there are many ways to get onto Slido. You can just type into your browser slido.com, hashtag emerging plan in the box, and it'll take you straight there. Or if you're really tech savvy, you can scan this QR code on the right now and it will take you straight there on your mobile phone. Or I did pop the link to Slido directly into the chat just now. And I'll keep doing that throughout the hour and a half as well, just to remind people that it's there. So if you have any questions that you post, we encourage you to put your name and your organization so we know who the question's from. And we've got this survey poll that will be live throughout the whole of the webinar, which asks five questions of you about our emerging plan and regional planning. And we want to hear from as many of you as possible. So please take some time to fill that out. After the webinar is finished, when we send an email with the slides, etc., we can also send the results of the Slido as well, if that would be helpful, as well as all the questions. And like Daniel said, we're hoping to make sure we answer every single one of them. Time is of the essence, but we'll see what happens. Don't be shy, ask us anything. Any and all questions are welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. And just say, obviously, we are recording this morning session, so you should have had a notification about that when you joined. So, yeah, emerging plan, let's crack on. I recognise, obviously, with lots of people on the call, some of you may know all about Water Resources East and our role, all about the emerging plan. You may have joined the launch of the plans when they came out 2 weeks ago. But just in case people haven't come across us or our plan before, just a quick recap, really. So Water Resources East is the independent, not-for-profit company charged by government to produce a regional water resources management plan for the whole of the east of England. We're one of 5 groups that sit under the National Framework for Water Resources, and that recognises that with climate change, in order to preserve and safeguard the environment, and also provide water for a growing population and growing economy, we need to be more strategic and organised about how we manage our scarce water resources. And that challenge is stronger than anywhere else, particularly in Eastern England. where we have sensitive habitats, we have a growing economy, and we already face quite severe water shortages. So the National Framework for Water Resources recognised that we need to look longer term. We need to look across individual water company boundaries, and also, particularly importantly in the East, we need to look cross-sector. So not just about what water we need for the public water supply, but also the needs of agriculture in particular, but also with industry, with energy, and I say also to support the growing economy. So the future demand for water is partly in terms of the environment, in terms of the environment we want to see and preserve going forward, but also reflects our own economic ambition for the East of England. And that feeds through a kind of a quite detailed technical process into a set of options, including demand management, about how we can square the supply and demand for water, not just now, but through to 2050 and beyond. And the output is that regional plan for Eastern England, squaring water resources to 2050 and beyond. And particularly, I'm very keen, as Water Resources East is already doing, thinking about our wider position and role in the region to deliver benefits for nature in terms of carbon sequestration, to feed into all the really exciting work now happening in terms of environmental improvements, as we pick up the Environment Act and how that's implemented in the months ahead. So on the next slide, again, a quick recap about our structure, as I say, as an independent independent not-for-profit membership organisation. These are our board members who obviously are part of the funding of Water Resources East. So our principal members are from the water companies, and that's where most of our funding comes from. But we're really proud that we are genuinely cross-sector. Our funding comes from a range of different sources, and increasingly looking to bring Water Resources East onto a kind of sustainable financial footing, funded by those partners who see benefits in being members of Water Resources East, so that we can deliver wider benefits beyond water resources into water quality, into river health improvement, into landscape recovery for the environment, and as part of adapting the region to climate change. And the next slide is the updated list of members. And this is the real strength of Water Resources East, not just our board members, but the fact we represent so many different organisations as part of our membership, that we can genuinely say that we are a cross-sector membership organisation that is trying to act in everyone's best interests in terms of making sure the water is available, including for the environment, that we would like to see going forward. On the next slide, I'm hoping, again, for most people, this is not your first experience of Water Resources East and the regional plan, because we pride ourselves on making sure that the plan that we produced, the emerging plan that came out 2 weeks ago, was built on the back of a huge amount of stakeholder engagement through Rachel, Nancy, and the whole team. Engagement events, planning conferences, catchment level workshops that ran last autumn, the regional planning conferences, which really got into the detail of how the regional simulator works, the different options, being able to visualize those options, and help to build up the regional plan from the bottom up, as well as six focus group sessions on agri-food, the environment, energy, all the different aspects of the plan that need to come together into what we've already published and will be updating over the months ahead. On the next slide, I mean, this is really the key slide, I suppose, in terms of what the regional plan actually is. So the process that we've been following over months and recent years, the technical process behind the scenes, which helps us crunch the numbers and come up with different scenarios and options. But really what it comes down to is this overall slide. First of all, recognizing the East of England is special, it's different. It's the driest region in the UK, 2/3 of average UK rainfall we get in this part of the country, already classified by the Environment Agency as seriously water stressed. We have one of the highest rates of housing growth forecast for the region outside of London and the southeast. So more population, growing towns and cities needing more water supply those homes. We're also responsible for a large share of agricultural production and food manufacturing in the East of England, a huge amount of agriculture, the bread basket of England, cereals, horticulture, as well as livestock. Huge amount of investment going in to adapt and prepare agriculture and prepare landscapes for climate change, but water needs for agriculture is an absolutely critical part of the emerging plan. And of course, we are blessed with a range of different internationally important environments designated habitats, Norfolk Broads, blessed with chalk streams across the region, which of course we need to make sure are protected with the water they need for good ecology. And when you tot up all the needs for water across the region as it stands today in that middle box, you get to about, well, 2.3 billion litres of water on average needed each day. The majority of that is for the public water supply for homes and for businesses, and also other uses of water from the public water supply, but a large share for spray irrigation, that blue on the chart on the right hand side, but also for power and energy, for industry, for food and drink. So overall, 2.3 billion litres a day needed at present to serve the growing population. When you track that forward in terms of what we might need in 2050 and beyond, we're talking about potentially a doubling of water needs by 2050, principally to make sure that the environment recovers. The environment has the water that it needs for good ecology. We leave more water in the environment for nature than we presently do, given in many cases we are over-abstracting chalk streams and other rivers, and that's preventing the ecology to be in the state that we would like to see it. So the 1.3 billion litres of water back in the environment means that we'll in future we need to take less water from aquifers and groundwater sources, and probably take more from lower in the catchment from surface water. But the environment isn't the only need for more water in future. Of course, climate change will make water patterns of rainfall less dependable, so we need to factor that in. Housing growth, of course, will mean more water for the growing population. We also want to make sure that we can provide greater drought resilience. So instead of the chances of usage bans being brought in once every 200 years on average, under national guidance, the National Framework for Water Resources, all water companies, all regional groups are being told to plan on the basis of only needing those usage bans once in every 500 years. Water for energy is one of those areas where we need to understand those projections with more certainty. But if you start to factor in the hydrogen that we'll need to meet net zero ambitions for the UK, plus also carbon capture, usage and storage, again, which is quite a water intensive process, then you start to factor in growing needs of water for energy. And lastly, of course, agricultural growth, more spray irrigation, potentially delivered more efficiently through drip irrigation and other technologies, but certainly more water needed because of the drying situation in the east of England. So that's the headline figures. And I guess the next couple of slides will take through what that means in practice. Again, the first point of call for all water companies and for Water Resources East should be demand management, and not just for the public water supply, but other sectors too. So how can we make more efficient use of the water that we already have? Water companies have all committed to reduce their leakage by 50% by 2050. And once that's done, that will bring water companies into kind of a world-class position. So you can never obviously stop water leakage altogether. It's one of those problems like the Forth Road Bridge, but certainly there is the potential to reduce water by half, leakage by half, and bring that leakage down to, say, world-class leakage performance. Per capita consumption under the national framework will be falling from about 140, 150, even with post-COVID, litres per person per day, much more towards 120, potentially even 110 litres per person per day by 2050. And in order for that to take place, of course, we do need support from government to tighten building regulations, to improve product standards, to label products for consumers so they know which dishwashers and washing machines, taps and showers use less water rather than more. But in terms of that scale, remember on the previous chart, we had over 2 billion litres of water per day to find. We think that even in some challenging customer side, demand side, behaviour change initiatives, we might be looking at something like 300 megalitres per day of water that we can save through demand side options. And just to say that all the numbers you see on the chart here are tentative, and the map is too. Don't read too much into either the figures at this stage or the location of certain assets. This is all part of an emerging regional plan, which will be refined with you, with other stakeholders in the months ahead. And so we can start to tighten up these numbers and make sure we've got the confidence in them. But just to give you a sense of scale, about 300 megalitres per day, million litres per day, could be found by just using water more efficiently. On the supply side options, this is where the regional simulator comes in, the Water Resources East has built. You can run the simulator, you can feed in all the different options for new sources of water to add to the network and to source water from. And if you look at all the potential options before you start to apply filters and to knock some out for feasibility or for costs or other reasons why they're not particularly practical, but you get to this 1.8 billion litres of water per day on the left-hand side at the bottom. But as you can see, we're really starting to look at some of the kind of tough options, potentially costly options, ones which have trade-offs, which are quite energy intensive when you're talking about desal, ones that potentially have an environmental impact, again, through things like desal. And of course, reservoirs need land, they take time to build. So I think part of the story here is that we're getting to the stage where the easy options, the low-hanging fruits have really already been exhausted, and there are going to be some tough choices ahead. Demand management has to be pursued first, but we are also going to have to seriously think about a major strategic infrastructure in order to balance our water demand and supply needs. If we're starting seriously to consider sea tankering, aquifer storage and recharge, things like conjunctive use, then it shows you that we're in the midst of water scarcity challenge, not in 2050, but in the here and now. If you look across all the different scenarios, all the different kind of portfolios of options that you could bring together to help to solve the water scarcity challenge, you get to that kind of stacked bar chart in the middle, which again, please take the numbers with a pinch of salt. But it shows that when you flex the model for different options, different scenarios, different assumptions, you tend to get at least a small subset of options coming out under a range of different scenarios. So when you do the sensitivity testing, you tend to always get the answer being, first of all, 2 new major reservoirs, one in South Lincolnshire and one in the Fens. There will be at least some desal, whether it's in Essex or somewhere else, but certainly at least some desal having to come through the pipeline at some point soon. There will also be some aquifer storage and recovery ASR. There are plans to pilot at least one in one location to pilot ASR. And of course, there will be potentially large-scale reuse schemes within industrial clusters, or just linking users up so that they can have their water needs supplied from non-potable sources rather than everything having to be treated to drinking water standard. But hopefully that helps to provide at least some colour to the kinds of projects and the major infrastructure that we are starting to see come through the emerging plan. On the next slide, again, what we want to be able to do in the emerging plan, and this is a kind of a slide from the emerging plan, it shows that well, 2 things. First of all, the demand side, behaviour change, leakage control, water efficiency absolutely has to be the first port of call for all companies, and we'll be challenging all companies to be as ambitious as they possibly can in what they're doing on the water efficiency side, both now and in the period ahead. So ramping up those programs to reduce per capita consumption, making sure their leakage programs are as ambitious as they possibly can be, but also then spreading out into the non-household sector, into businesses, hotels, schools, and other sectors that could also use water more efficiently, agriculture as part of that as well. When we get into the next 5-year period, 2025 to 2030, towards the end of this decade, there has to be a continuing significant focus on household and non-household water efficiency. Smart metering programs should become the norm. We should see smart metering being rolled out, because smart meters are so great, not only to help customers reduce their own consumption and to save money, but also they pinpoint where leakage, particularly within customer properties, is taking place. And through all of this, looking to deliver innovative multi-sector kind of both household and non-household approaches to water efficiency. On the next slide, we talk about the supply side strategy. And again, in the here and now, given water scarcity challenges, we've already got a focus on the immediate abstraction hotspots, chalk streams in the Broads, the Ant Valley, various flagship projects already underway, bringing stakeholders together to try and resolve the abstraction challenges that are already being applied. We also know, given that desal will be part of the answer going forward, we need to bring forward that innovation, that next generation desal opportunities to make sure that we manage the energy demands, and also obviously thinking about the environmental impacts of brackish water having to be discharged to the environment. We know, as we said in the previous slide, or the slide before, that strategic reservoir options are absolutely part of the low regret path in a range of different climate scenarios. Almost regardless of the assumption that you plug into the model, you get the need for at least two major new strategic reservoirs being designed and built. And those projects I'll come to in a moment. But there's also other infrastructure studies to say potentially quite significant opportunities for water reuse between different users, and just and more innovative ways in which we can use existing abstraction licenses and rights to be able to supply water users between different times of the year, making sure that there's just more innovation in the ways in which existing sources of water are used to meet people's needs. We also want to make sure we do as much as we can, particularly when we're looking into the next 5-year period, through transfers, through getting aquifer storage and recovery off the ground with a pilot potentially for the Sherwood Sandstone, and thinking about not just grey infrastructure, but green infrastructure. So one of the projects you'll probably heard of already, and Julia will be talking about later, is how we can use nature-based approaches to store more water in the landscape, so that you provide the water people needs, provide those co-benefits in terms of flood risk management and environmental recovery, and also being much less of a kind of carbon intensive way to deliver those water supply needs. Looking beyond that, of course, it's into implementation from 2030 onwards. Even if we start to design the reservoirs now, take them through the kind of procurement process in the years ahead, they're unlikely to come into supply until 2030 onwards, which is why it's so important, given those long lead times, that we really understand now which those low regret options are, so that we can get those processes underway as quickly as possible. It's about understanding the kind of long-term pipeline, the long-term need for investment, and making sure that those infrastructure projects start down the track sooner rather than later. On the next slide, Rachel, just the next two slides just summarise where we are with the two major reservoir schemes. Of course, these are being promoted by the individual water companies, and there's a separate process, which again I'll explain very briefly in a moment, to take these forward. Again, take the numbers with a pinch of salt. These are all up for grabs still as part of the emerging regional plan, and the location, the map, again, is up for debate. There are options for different locations starting to be investigated now, but just to give a sense of scale and a sense of location, we are talking about a major reservoir in South Lincolnshire, about the size of Greffham, as I understand it, Greffham Water, able to provide something like 150 million litres of new resource for the region. And of course, that's linked into a potential transfer of water from the Anglian region into the Affinity Water region, again, to help Affinity balance their water supply demands. On the next slide, the second major reservoir is again location to be decided, lots of options to be developed in terms of exactly where this should best be sited. But it needs to be in the fens. We're talking about potentially 100 megalitres per day of new resource. Obviously, again, there with the link with Cambridge Water to supply the growing Cambridgeshire area to help preserve and protect the chalk streams there. And in both cases, on the next slide, what we're trying to do is make sure that, these reservoirs work hard for us and for all stakeholders. They're not just about providing public water supply, they're about providing water for other users, particularly agriculture, as well as industry and energy. And as far as possible, they provide integrated water management benefits. So making sure that they are doing as much in terms of flood risk and managing drainage for the low-lying parts of the east of England, as well as providing those water resource benefits. So for example, using open water channels to move water around and to help manage water levels, rather than have grey infrastructure buried under the surface. To be able to link up the different catchments and take water from different rivers depending on where that water is most available, rather than having single points of abstraction, which might then limit how much water we can take from certain times of the year and just decrease the resilience of the overall system. And of course, this Future Fens Integrated Adaptation Strategy, which is a flagship project that WRE is proud to be a partner of, now has its own, it is its own project. It was launched at COP26 with the manifesto published online, which you can see on the right-hand side. And this is a project which we really hope will really get going this year. On the next slide, we just wanted to kind of make the point, I suppose, rather than go through the detail of this plan, is to make the point that all these different processes are aligned, that when you have Water Resources East and our emerging regional plan, the timetable is absolutely tied into what the individual water companies are doing with their own water resources management plans. And several people on this call, many people on this call would have joined the sessions yesterday. I think it was Anglian Water and Essex and Suffolk were presenting their water resources plans. I know there's a session for Cambridge, and I'm sure there will be for Affinity and the other water companies involved in Water Resources East. So those plans are absolutely aligned. The whole process is also aligned with the RAPID gateway process. So RAPID is the Regulatory Alliance for Progressing Infrastructure Delivery. It's a joint alliance between Ofwat and the Environment Agency principally. And the idea there is that if lots of water companies are starting to pursue these major infrastructure projects, let's make sure the regulatory kind of process is aligned and that we can get through the gateway process and get into the planning system as quickly as we can, given we know we need these strategic infrastructure options to be coming online in the foreseeable future. The strategic resource options we've been talking about so far have been through Gateway 1 in 2021, and they are proceeding to Gateway 2 later on in 2022. And of course, those two major projects for us are the South Links Reservoir, the Fens Reservoir, and then the associated transfers into Affinity and Cambridge. Next slide, please. So that's what we know so far and what we've presented as part of the emerging plan. But it is very much, we want to reinforce that this is an emerging plan at this stage, which we've opened up for consultation because we want some early feedback. But we know there are things that we need to clarify and to develop in the months ahead. First of all, making sure we absolutely understand those short-term water resource deficits in agricultural supply, those pinch points that are already starting to come along, particularly linked to abstraction reform and understanding what that means, which is later on bullet 5 on this slide. We know we need to dig in more detail in terms of the exact needs for environmental restoration, the exact needs in terms of river flows within individual catchments of water resource zones, to balancing the needs of different sectors, including with the environment on a place-by-place basis. Agriculture, agri-food, and the energy sector's water needs. We have forecasts, but we think we should go into those in the next level of detail, look into the uncertainties, get some more confidence around the different forecasts, as well as within housing growth, of course, happening across the region, including things like the Oxford to Cambridge ARC, which we may hear about a little bit more tomorrow, as I understand it, when the Levelling Up white paper comes out from the government. I've already mentioned the potential, the risks and challenges already arising from license abstraction and reform. And just before Christmas, the Environment Agency was consulting on ways to bring the license regime into the environmental permitting regulations, which will have implications for all water users. And of course, what we really want to understand at a much more detailed local level is those local water needs and desires by different groups coming together and to focus on catchments in the round. And whilst taking forward innovative measures and pilots, other projects that both tell us what we need to pull together in terms of our emerging plan, but also how Water Resources East can feed into those wider questions about landscape restoration, environmental improvement, local nature recovery strategies, peatland restoration, biodiversity net gain, and all those other, say, wider questions. Next slide, please. So just in summary, there is a water crisis today. So James Bevan talks about the jaws of death being 20 years away. That doesn't feel like that's right for the east of England. It feels like the jaws of death are here today. People are already struggling to find water they need for their needs, and we need to do something about it. We can't afford to stand still. We need to be investing both in water demand and behaviour change, tackling leakage, as well as bringing forward those new strategic infrastructure options, because the scale of the challenge is really quite significant. By 2050, we are projecting that almost up to twice as much water will be needed may need to leave more water in the environment, but we need to replace that water with other sources. And that's a really significant challenge that just can't wait. Water efficiency and demand management is the first port of call. We'll be challenging companies to go as far as they possibly can on that front, but that won't be enough on its own. As you saw the numbers earlier, that is helpful. We absolutely need to do that, but that's not going to be enough. And significant new infrastructure will be required, with water companies already pursuing those no and low regret actions first. Those options that appear under almost any circumstances, any scenarios, that stand as robust options, regardless almost of which inputs you put in. And of course, further work is needed through the final plan. We'll be publishing next iteration in autumn. In fact, I think this is the next slide, Rachel, is it? The timetable. So the next iteration of the plan will be coming out in September. So here we are on the 1st of February, point 2 on this chart. The plan itself has already been out there on our website for 2 weeks, and we really want to have your feedback. But we will also be talking to you. We'll find other ways to engage with you to look into options and issues more on a local basis. So over the next couple of months, one of the major things we've got to do is, say, drill into the detail for individual catchments and understand the different needs and options and opportunities. That the consultation closes at the end of February. There will then be a series of decision points and iterations of the plan internally, so kind of behind the scenes, until we're ready to publish the plan in its draft form in September. Obviously, once the draft plan is out, there'll be a further range of consultation events and opportunities to feed into that draft regional plan alongside the water company plans before we track forward to point 12 and the launch of the final regional plan, together with the next iteration, I think, of the draft water resources management plans by water companies in September 2023. So this clearly, and this is why it's called an emerging plan at this stage, because there's lots more work to do, lots more opportunities to engage with you and our wider stakeholders so that we can get this right. Because this plan, as I say, is the first time that we've brought together a plan, a single plan for water resources for the region. And certainly the plan needs to do the job, both to create create the narrative, to create the story, create the overall approach to how we're going to manage regional water resources as part of the national framework. But the plan will only work if it also works locally within catchments, delivering the improvements to the environment that you're looking for, delivering for the improvements in water supplies for agriculture, for energy for industry, and for these other sectors. So this plan needs to bridge both between the national, the regional, and the local, and we can only do that, in short, with your help. So I think that's the end of this part. We'll obviously turn to Q&A later on. To encourage you back onto Slido to start putting any questions you have in there. But before we get to the Q&A session, I was going to turn to members of my team just to give you an update on the various catchment projects and spin-offs that we've been taking forward in recent months. First, it's Ben is up first. Do you want to introduce yourself quickly and then take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's all good.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Just wanted to check. Yeah, so for those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Fitzsimons. I'm WRE's new technical manager. I joined in early October last year, so I can't claim to take too much credit for the work that's gone into the development of the emerging plan today and the regional model and all the great work that's taken us to the point that Daniel's just described. But from now on, as we move through the next few months towards the draft plan and ultimately the final plan and whatever follows that, a key area of interest for me is going to be about understanding how that large scale planning at the regional level and the adoption of and promotion of strategic level schemes links up to the type of things that Daniel was just addressing at the local scale, and kind of making sure those links are being made so that we're taking this top down and bottom up approach, but it's all kind of aligning under a common framework. So yeah, I'm just going to take a few minutes just to kind of reflect on some of the work that we're doing at different scales and the importance of that. So while this slide's up here, this kind of just outlines a few of the key flagship projects, as we're calling them, that sit around the regional plan and will feed in both evidence and be influenced by the development of those strategic schemes. But I think I just want to take a moment just to kind of reflect on the fact that the type of thing that Daniel's just been describing around those larger options, the strategic scale schemes for the purposes of regional planning, is in excess of 10 megalitres per day, 10 million litres per day capacity. That type of work and the use of our regional simulation and decision-making tools has started to show us the nature of those schemes in a regional and a national picture. And what we need to remember is that's an understanding of a sort of snapshot of how we can deliver that resilience in the future, a snapshot in time. But what we're now starting to look at is how the lead time and the implementation of those options at different scales helps us actually address the planning challenge as we move through time. And I think what we're starting to see is that, and many of you won't be surprised by this, is that those strategic schemes, and in particular simply those low regret options that come up time and time again as part of robust portfolios, are not sufficient alone to address the full planning challenge. And whether that's addressing that challenge in the short to medium term or in specific localities, and those of you representing other sectors will appreciate that water security challenges and associated considerations are often played out at a local level, and those strategic schemes will only have a certain sphere of influence, even if they are plugged into the wider network. So as we start to move into these smaller geographies, we might call that catchments, we might look at counties, we might look at other planning units, and we start to explore the trade-offs. What we're likely to see is that smaller schemes and a greater variety of schemes and innovations are going to be needed to fill the existing and those emerging gaps as we move through the planning period. So the idea is that WRE, in this kind of unique position that it has in kind of sitting in between various groups and parties, is that we can provide, as we start to look at these smaller geographies, the mechanisms and the forums to help understand the type of challenges that are being faced in those catchments that go beyond the remit of our regional simulator. So we're then going to have the opportunity to talk to local stakeholders around water quality benefits, flood risk challenges, and how different land management changes in the future and the desires of local abstractors and businesses can play out and help us understand what those solutions might be at a local level. So this is like a really critical time as we move through the next months to make sure that we're able to kind of plug those gaps and play an important part to fill the gap that other planning mechanisms don't necessarily have. So this slide really shows that is there to sort of indicate that when we're already working at a variety of scales, so that we're not starting from scratch here. And a couple of my colleagues are going to talk about a few of these more specifically, so you get an update on those projects. But what's really important is to not see these as separate, discrete projects. These are trialing new and innovative approaches, and in many cases, these are things that haven't been done before, and it's not easy. The Norfolk Water Strategy, looking at the role of nature-based solutions and how we can understand the benefits and the costs of those at scale. The Water for Tomorrow project is really looking to kind of mimic almost some of the regional approaches, but at a more local scale, so we can start to see really clear alignment. And I'll briefly reflect on the systematic conservation planning in a moment. But yeah, as these projects build through, we're hoping that whilst they may be focused in particular localities at the moment, if they are successful and we learn, which I'm sure we will learn great lessons from them, we can roll those out into the other parts of the region and perhaps beyond as we move through time. I think we can move on to the next slide. So yeah, as I said before, we're not starting from scratch here. Quite a few of you will have been part of the autumn workshops where we looked at kind of the larger catchment aggregations, and those were really as kind of initial fact-finding and kind of information sharing platforms, and through those discussions we've been able to kind of understand existing projects, and we need to understand that WRE's plan cannot replace and it shouldn't duplicate other plans. We need to understand how these all link together. But those were really useful sessions to help us start to see the bigger picture, and we've just begun work now to kind of collate the outputs from those, along with some of the key input data that will inform later decisions into PDF packs, so that across the region we'll have something to show at least a moment in time around what we understand and the challenges. And the hope is that whether that's through our own planning processes or the plans of our members, that might start to identify gaps and help you build business cases around actions and investigations and programs that you might need to do. But this is all very much a work in progress. As we go into the coming months through to the September draft plan, I think there is absolutely an aspiration that we do a deeper dive into some smaller localities. And I think just a brief bit of expectation management, this is really important work and we shouldn't rush it. And what we do want to do is make sure we're testing approaches and innovations in our methods well, and doing it right in a smaller number of locations. I think that's why the Water for Tomorrow project, which Mary will talk about in a moment, is going to be a great vehicle to help us have that focused delivery. But ultimately, as we move towards September, we need to remember that this is not the end of the road. This is the emerging plan. This is a moment in time. We're seeking your input, and as we publish in the autumn. That's another milestone, but this is going to be an ongoing journey, and we're not going to have all of the solutions by September, but we hope that by diving into those smaller geographies, we're going to hopefully be able to unpick some of those challenges and what it means to the local stakeholders there. I think if we drop onto the next slide, Rachel, just really important one to reflect on in terms of the systematic conservation plan. Hopefully many of you will have been able to listen to Sam's final webinar a couple of weeks ago that kind of brought us up to date on what that's achieved. I think we can all appreciate that's a great tool, and WRE has shown leadership, I think, in bringing this together. And this is going to be really, really critical as we start to move into smaller geographies. We're certainly going to use using it, and I hope that as the final outputs ask, we hope that our members will be able to use it to start to guide decisions and build on that as we move into different areas of planning. But key for me as we move into the smaller geographies and catchments is that anything we do needs to be hung off a certain framework. We need to all be moving towards the right goal. And I think the systematic conservation planning work alongside the environmental destination work in terms of understanding the abstraction changes needed to deliver flow improvements can help us understand the role that local actions will play in delivering that regional level strategic plan. So this is going to be a really important piece of work that we all take through to the catchment level. So I'm going to hand over to Mary to talk about the Water for Tomorrow project.
Thanks, Ben. I apologies for the sunshine, although I feel like I shouldn't because it's a rare occurrence these days. But hopefully you can see me okay on the screen. So the Water for Tomorrow project, as Ben's mentioned, is one of these key projects that's going to be feeding into the regional plan. It's a local catchment focused project that has 3 catchments within England and 2 in France. It's an Interreg funded project that's got 5 project partners, of which WRE is one. And then there's the Rivers Trust and the Environment Agency. And then we have Cabelaar and BRGM in France that's also working with us to achieve the overall goals of the project. The project itself is quite innovative in that it's looking at local catchment ways in which we can ensure that there is water available for local economies to continue to thrive, and is looking at every sector within these catchments. The big plan is that whatever we do within these catchments will be reviewed and reflected upon, and then the lessons learned will then apply to other catchments within the Water Resources East region. So we're focusing our main efforts on the Broadlands catchment, where we're leading on the technical work that's being carried out. Currently, we've got consultants and contractors working on water resource models, options development, so potential water resource management ideas and solutions, and this is all feeding into a decision support tool. We're also just put out a new tender that's looking at environment and carbon considerations of the options and water management within the Broadlands catchment. And then we'll be looking at tying all these different work packages together to create a catchment management system. We're still developing this and what we'd like to see from it, but in very basic terms, we're hoping that it will be a simulator that can test historic drought events, what happened and what could be done differently to mitigate the impacts on water resource management, and also to look at future scenarios and how we can better manage water within the catchment to ensure that there's water available for all sectors. The project's still in its kind of early phases, and we haven't got data to show as yet, but we will do when it comes to the next round of Water Resources East local catchment workshops. We're also looking for anybody that is doing anything innovative within these 3 English catchments when it comes to water resource management. So if you know of, say, a farmer that's looking at soil moisture levels on his farm, or you are somebody that's carrying out a cool way of storing and capturing and storing water for your own use, then please do get in touch. Our email address is on the screen, or we also have a website that you can look at. And what we're wanting to do is kind of showcase these as best practice, but also look at how we could potentially use them within the catchment management system as an example of what could be done within the area. That's probably all I want to mention just now. But if you'd like to find out more, then please do check us out or drop us an email. Thanks, Ben. I'm now going to pass over to Julia.
Hi all, I'm Julia Beeden. I work alongside Mary and Daniel and the others you know well in the team, and I'm working on a project that is funded by Norfolk County Council and all the councils within Norfolk, by Anglian Water and the Nature Conservancy and Water Resources East. So I'm just going to quickly run you through firstly what the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme is, what it's what's intended to achieve, and then secondly, how this work supports the regional plan in terms of what evidence, for example, it will present. So the Norfolk Water Strategy Programme is basically about achieving 3 deliverables by autumn this year. It's about using a catchment-based, a whole catchment-based approach to understand how we can bring in large-scale investment in terms of large-scale funding and financing into the use of nature-based solutions for tackling water security by developing an investable programme. So we've got 3 major deliverables that are expected. One is a strategy, and that strategy will set out how and where we think we can use nature-based solutions to make a difference in the different catchments within Norfolk. And then alongside that, we will develop an investable programme looking at the different amounts of funding that we need to bring in for Norfolk to make that difference using nature-based solutions across whole catchments to achieve real benefits, not just for water security, but for other areas as well. And the investable programme will basically become the basis of a Norfolk Water Fund. So that's our second deliverable that won't be set up by autumn, but we'll have a framework in mind for how we can set that up and the types of funding that we'll be bringing in. And the Water Fund basically is as it says on the tin, will be a vehicle for mobilising that large-scale funding and financing that can then be used by existing delivery partners in Norfolk to help to continue to deliver nature-based solutions, but this time much more at scale, a larger scale with more emphasis. And then the third deliverable of the programme is a collaborative or collective action platform, which is really very much about bringing together all the different stakeholders in Norfolk and potentially a bit wider that are working on nature-based solutions for improving water security. And that the platform's aims will be really to provide that supporting infrastructure that is needed to deliver at scale, because we all know it's not just about having the funding. Do we have the skills? Do we have the resources? Do we have a clear understanding of all the different management techniques that are needed for nature-based solution, or for, is there enough monitoring going on in the environment, for example? So we'll be launching a consultation on the 22nd of March, which is World Water Day. And through that consultation, we really want to get your feedback in terms of the future aims and priorities for both the Collaborative Action Platform and the Water Fund. And the platform is something that will be Norfolk-wide, that will very much look to try and fill some of the missing gaps and the problems and challenges that people have in delivering. We want to try and show how we can work together to try and unpick some of those issues. And also to try and get an understanding of the priorities for the Water Fund, which will be a bit more focused than the action platform at first. We will initially need to focus on 1, 2 or 3 catchments to make sure that we are initially testing this pilot in an area where we know we can get the greatest benefits for nature-based solutions. And the first time around, we're going to focus that Water Fund on intra-year variability. So that's the water security challenge that we've chosen to look at. So that kind of issue of sometimes there being so much water causing flooding, and other times there not being enough. So that will be the first focus of the Water Fund, but the Water Fund will, the intention is that this will continue on to 2030 and further afield, much further afield, but also a longer timeline, and that we can have other phases where the investable programme looks to look at other water security challenges as well. So just to finish this slide, the focus, as I said, again, is very much about nature-based solutions. It's about the whole catchment approach and really considering all the different benefits that nature-based solutions can have, but with a focus on water resources and flood risk. Rachel, can you just go to my next slide, please? So this is just to explain how this programme and the development of this Water Fund in Norfolk actually supports the wider regional plan. So Water Resources East, as you know, is very much about innovation and wanting to test new things. And we know that the area, the region, is going to need some really large scale infrastructure. But we also want to make sure that we are testing all the different options. We want to be sure that we fully understand how nature-based solutions can, if they really can, how they can impact and benefit the region, and how they can potentially provide support, complement, or even alternatives to traditional infrastructure. So the modelling that we're just starting to undertake now with the Environment Agency will test which nature-based solutions, and by how much nature-based solutions, can enable landscape storage, aquifer recharge and increased flows. And we're working to produce outputs to define the number of interventions that might be needed across a whole catchment to really make a difference at a catchment scale or a county scale. And they'll be looking at where in Norfolk do we think they're most appropriate and can create the greatest benefits. As I started by saying, we'll be looking to see if it is possible for nature-based solutions, when delivered at scale, to be an alternative, either on a small or large scale, to some of the traditional solutions in Norfolk, and those being applied across the region. And also we'll be looking to see where the use of nature-based solutions can complement, support, or even mitigate the trade-offs of traditional infrastructure. So the outputs of this project will feed into the regional plan in June, but also this project will continue past that, and we will look to inform future iterations and the further development of all the different projects coming forward to see how nature-based solutions can really play a key role in the future of our region's water supply. Thank you very much. That's all from me, and I hand back to Daniel now to discuss how you can get involved and respond to our consultation. And I'm very happy to take any questions if you put those on Slido. Thank you ever so much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you very much, team. So moving on to the next slide. So as I said, the emerging regional plan is out for consultation, like all the other regional plans around the country. But until 28th of February to respond. I'll include a link in a moment in the next chat, so in the next slide. But in terms of the consultation questions, we thought we'd just structure people's responses by asking, posing these questions to you. So first of all, have we gained a clear initial view, at least, of the problem of future water deficits across both the environment, but also across all water users, all water sectors? Are we taking the right approach to identify potential solutions to mitigate the challenge? Does our emerging adaptive plan, including the immediate low regret options such as the reservoirs, look like they will help address the problem? Are the technical methodologies, processes, decision support tools we've used robust and appropriate for the task? Has our emerging regional plan been created in a fair, open and transparent process, including the right stakeholders and organisations? And are there any areas which you feel Water Resources East should be considering which are not currently reflected in our plan? What have we missed? And you may have seen on Slido that Nancy has been posing some of these questions as part of some polls, and perhaps we'll turn to those in a moment. And just to repeat on Slido, as well as putting in your own questions, you can upvote for other people's questions, because when it comes to the Q&A panel in a minute, I'll probably be going for the most popular questions down, just to make sure we answer those that people really want to have us talk about. To respond to the consultation, so all the materials are there on the Water Resources East website. So there's the link there to the regional plan. There is an online survey response form which you can use, just if that's easiest, or alternatively, we're very happy to take people's thoughts, comments, suggestions via email, so contact@wre.org.uk. And as I've said several times, the deadline is the end of this month, so just 4 weeks or so to go. So next slide, please. Yeah, just to repeat, so Slido is there for all our questions. If people have put questions into the chat, Nancy throughout has been just encouraging you to go online onto Slido to repost them on there, just so that we've got them all in one place. It'd be easiest just to work from one list. And again, to encourage you to upvote for other people's questions, because it's at this point where I kind of slip into kind of chair mode, and I'll be fielding the various questions to members of the panel, including not only the Water Resources East team, but we've lined up various other kind of sector leads and specialists in case we get questions, for example, about agriculture, about energy in particular. So we've got Jenna and Nicola from Energy UK can talk about water needs for energy. We've got Luke from Anglian Water, but particularly thinking about the environmental destination work they've been doing to look at how much water might need to be left back in the environment for nature. I've got Kelly Houston-Fish in a new role at the National Farmers Union as their water resources lead, Simon Ross from the Environment Agency, and Josh Fothergill from who's been looking after our integrated environmental assessment. So turning to the questions, the top question, if I just scroll up, is about housing growth. Yeah, that's some of that stuff came through in the chat today. I guess the simple answer is this. So I'll read out the question. So if the East has the most serious water shortages, why is the government encouraging high housing growth? Simple option, build where there is adequate water. And I guess there's various answers to that. You know, obviously there is population growth. We need houses for people to live in. And I guess one thing I would refer back to is our previous chair's comment. So Henry Cater was actually on the call today. His mantra, the thing he always used to say to me in sessions like this, is that there's not necessarily a shortage of water in the east of England, but a shortage of water management. And so the question really is, how can we use the scarce water resources that they are to best effect, so that we can not only meet the needs of the environment, but also meet the needs of the growing population? Certainly in my role as chair of the UK Water Efficiency Strategy Steering Group, me and the whole group has been making the case, hopefully, fairly firmly to the government that they do need to improve building regulations for new housing so that when built, it is as water efficient as possible, that even the more stretching standard within current building regulations of 110 litres per person per day is inadequate, particularly when you're talking about parts of the east of England where water shortages are really quite acute. And if you're thinking about contemplating growth, for example, in the Oxford-Cambridge Arc, that development has to be as water efficient as it possibly can be. And going beyond kind of water efficient appliances, taps and showers within the home, think about rainwater capture, grey water recycling, integrated water management, both at a household level and a community level, in integrating rainwater capture with sustainable drainage, using the sustainable drainage assets that you're building within the development as temporary water storage, which you can then treat to an appropriate standard and use for irrigation, used for flushing toilets, used for various different uses. And that's exactly the kind of conversation that we want to have with the government this year when they review their roadmap for building regulations. So they committed in a ministerial statement last July to review building regulations to hopefully tighten up and make it more water efficient, to encourage water reuse within new housing developments, whilst also consulting on their commitments to introduce a water label, a water efficiency label for appliances, taps and showers. So we support the idea that new housing should be water efficient, but for me that doesn't mean putting the brakes on development overall. I think the two can be squared. The next question, I'll probably try and field somebody else. In fact, the next question is about ambitious targets for water consumption, again, for looking at the goal within the national framework to get to 110 litres per person per day as an average for the whole population. This is not just about new housing growth, but it's about all of us within households using no more than 110 litres per person per day, or at least that as an average. So Jeff, I was going to bring in, so Jeff Darch, obviously our technical director of Water Resources East, as well as the lead for water resources at Anglian Water. Jeff, what's the answer here? Why have we chosen 110? Sorry, why have we chosen 120 where other groups have chosen 110?
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for the question and the interest in it. So the simple answer is that we've been somewhat cautious within the East. So partly we wanted to make sure that the numbers that we're putting forward were actually achievable. They're not just an aspiration, they're actually backed up by things that we can implement, and we've got some knowledge of that implementation. The second thing is that we've not included the benefit of government interventions within that 120 number. And if you were to take the kind of numbers that have been talked around, so somewhere between 11 and 27 litres per head per day, that can be netted off that figure, and clearly that gets us below, and in some cases well below the 110. So you've got to dig down a little bit, but absolutely, WRE is already one of the regions that has lowest per capita consumptions, and we will continue with that.
Brilliant, thank you, Jeff. And the next question is related to that, which is about, does smart metering really affect consumer use? Again, is that for you, Jeff, perhaps?
I think so. I mean, the short answer is yes, and that's based on data, not just on a hypothesis. So we've had smart meters in the ground in Newmarket for the past 3 or 4 years. We've had them in Norwich for the past couple of years, and it really does make a difference. Interestingly, it makes a difference not just to those customers who are paying on the basis of measured charges, but it actually makes a difference to those customers who are actually paying on rateable value. In other words, their consumption is not even relevant to their charge. The other thing that's really interesting about smart meters is the ability to detect leaks. That's leaks both on what we call the customer supply pipe, which is the pipe between the meter and your stop tap, but also on leaks within the home. So we can detect when there's a continuous use of water, and we can alert the customer to that. And just to give you an idea, a leaking cistern, so a leaking valve within a cistern that you might see the water moving on, is around 400 litres a day, believe it or not, which is around the sort of consumption of a household of 3. And we're seeing these leaks in a lot of properties. So fixing those makes a huge difference to water consumption and to leakage.
That's a really good point. And again, as part of the water efficiency strategy steering group, with WaterWise, with the other water companies, we've been working with the Bathroom Manufacturers Association on ways to design out that kind of water inefficiency, those leaky loos that unfortunately are around about 8% of toilets installed in this country leak. As Jeff says, that's potentially hundreds of litres per day, just going almost invisibly down the back of the toilet. The next question is about agricultural water use, or at least the kind of why develop these reservoirs on some of the UK's most productive prime agricultural land? Why not use existing gravel pits and brick pits? I think part of the answer is that it's not an either or situation. We actually need to do all of these different things if we're going to square the water supply balance. And actually, we are starting to have some quite interesting conversations with people, the Mineral Products Association, some of the major aggregate suppliers and other companies in that space who are, as you say, having you've taken the aggregate out the ground and turning those into habitats primarily. But is there a role that those smaller water resource options might play as a kind of formal water resource option? And again, I don't know whether Ben or Jeff wanted to come on those smaller options. Ben?
I mean, I think you've largely said the important points there, Daniel. I think siting of a reservoir has to play into its considerations lots of different factors: the underlying geology, the costs of transporting material and waste material, and how that connects in with the remainder of the network. And yeah, I'd say at the moment, in terms of local and medium-sized options, nothing's off the table right now. We're keen to hear all suggestions, and that's why we are trying to be plugged into those groups that you just talked about, Daniel. And I know that there's much wider plans around habitat, using those types of sites for habitat enhancements as well. But it's not just about single use, and we're trying to play that into the development of the strategic size reservoirs as well. It's not just about fixing one problem; it's about addressing multiple issues at the same time.
Yeah. Of course, the existing land use, whether it's for agriculture or everything else, is absolutely part of the assessment criteria. And what we've done through Water Resources East is convened a South Links water partnership and a Fens water partnership to bring the various stakeholders together, active in, with an interest in taking forward those reservoirs, so that we come to the right choices. We are working through different options, different solutions, different locations with those groups, as we proceed towards a kind of formal consultation on different sites to make sure that we're making the right choice. I mean, there are only certain places where you can site a reservoir, but where you choose to site that reservoir, or actually reservoir systems, which will get us to the next question, it is something that obviously we need to think through very carefully. And the next question is, I think, about in terms of water supply, is it a single reservoir we're talking about, or is it reservoir systems? Maybe would a reservoir system be more appropriate if we're trying to balance these different needs, provide flood risk management benefits, and biodiversity benefits too. Again, Jeff, maybe do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, that thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I mean, I think for flood risk, that's true. I think for agricultural demand, that's true as well. I think the challenge for public water supply is that we're looking for some pretty big volumes here. I mean, 50 million cubic meters is a pretty large store of water. And the modelling that we've been doing is suggesting that we're probably going to need 2 of those kind of size of reservoirs within our region to meet future demands, including leaving water in the environment elsewhere. So I think it's a bit back to the sort of, well, we probably need a bit of all of this. We probably need some smaller provisions, but we also do need 1 or 2 pretty significant stores of water as well. I think the other thing that we're looking at now is we're looking at sort of possible sort of adaptive options for the reservoirs. So, for example, with the fens, can we build a slightly smaller one in the shorter term and supplement that in the longer term? So that's all kind of part of our thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Back to the demand side again, does the demand side strategy account for water efficiency labelling, building regulations, national comms and behaviour change programmes? I think probably, Jeff, you all answered it before in that what we've assumed so far is kind of 120. Obviously, what we can do on the demand side will be a major factor and a kind of sensitivity test for the options coming forward. But obviously, and with government support, if they really do introduce really quite tight building regulations, and one of the things we've been proposing is that the building regulations should be based on the water label. So if you've got appliances, dishwashers, taps and showers with an A to F label like you would get for energy efficiency labelling, then simply for houses, all homes should be built with only A-rated appliances. And that makes it much simpler than the current water calculator approach that you have within Part G of building regulations at the moment, which, to be honest, is, it's based on kind of assumptions about consumer behaviour. And it'd be much simpler all round if building regulations were based on applying and only installing appliances of a certain level of water efficiency. Is there anything more to say about that, Jeff, in terms of, could we move to 110? If the government were to do something really quite significant on water efficiency this year, how would that update the regional plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, could make a huge contribution. And if you look at that over the long term, you're talking of tens of megalitres a day, potentially, that could be realised from that based on our modelling. So, it could probably get sort of, halfway to a reservoir, and it's that kind of scale that we're talking about. But it does need a lot of concerted action from government. And more of the behavioural change type stuff. I mean, we employ a couple of teachers, for example, at Anglian, who go out to schools, particularly to sort of promote this kind of message. And I can't underplay how important that kind of activity is.
Yeah, and just what's happening in the background, of course, is the Environment Act. Having got royal assent for the Act last year. The government should be bringing forward proposals for the suite of legally binding long-term binding targets for the different aspects of the Act, and consulting on those in March. So the 4 areas for targets to be set are, of course, on air quality, on nature, and on water, waste and resources. But water is one of those 4 areas. The government published kind of plans in drafts, I think it was last year, so the year before last now, whereby they definitely have in mind a national water consumption target, as well as targets on water quality. The water consumption target, we and many other people have been saying it should be based on distribution input, which is the total amount of water put into the public water supply, to make sure that water companies, their feet, the feet is held to the fire in terms of that 50% reduction in leakage by 2050, which is part of the industry's commitment, but also that demand management, both through households and non-households, are part of that long-term target. And having that target set nationally means that the government, therefore, is then responsible for making sure that target is met. And that will therefore hopefully bring forward policy from government, not just on new homes, existing households, but also going into non-households. There's a separate question, there's a separate kind of series of projects going on to look at water efficiency within agriculture. And we'll also be looking at industry and other non-household and direct abstraction of water, so that the focus isn't merely on households. Turning to the next question, which I think it comes from Archie, is about planning for new Pathfinder and R&D programs to develop additional options for this and future plans. As I say, it's an emerging plan. This is an iterative process. But Ben, do you want to say a bit more about how the options have come together and what further work we'll be doing to kind of establish if there are more options out there?
Yeah, I mean, the way long the kind of unconstrained list of options gets developed, we start from basic building blocks, and a kind of a tried and tested approach through the water industry is to kind of start with these high level categories and explore, really, as I said before, nothing's off the table. And this is where options like towing icebergs and sea tankering and all sorts of other things come in. And each option is kind of run through a screening process to whittle that list down to something that looks feasible. And in some cases, things might be feasible in the longer term and not shorter term, but that gets played into the decision making. And so that becomes that wheel that you showed on one of your early slides. It's kind of, that's the at our disposal list of options that we can choose from. But absolutely, what we need to bear in mind is that what's feasible now might not represent the full list in the future. I can see comments coming up here around innovative approaches and land management and capturing water in different ways for different sectors that could have benefits at different scales. And I think that we need to bear in mind that the options that have been played through the regional level planning at the moment are the larger options. And I think, there are going to be cases, let's say it's energy intensive processes like desalination, etc. We keep coming back to the idea that if those are designed in the right way and there's some more research into what could be done about sourcing that energy from sustainable co-location of sites and plugging that into the network in an appropriate way, then if we can just defer that decision by building on demand management and exploring other low regret options, we can make sure they are done in the right way. And then as we come down to the smaller levels, I think, as we start to unpick and understand, as Mary was saying, some good ideas that people are already having out there, we can play those back in and use our platform to roll them out more widely. But yeah, we're definitely open to in the future supporting research and looking at new and innovative ways to make sure we're making the best use of water in the region.
I think that's one of the that's one of the benefits of having a regional plan, promoting the fact that there is a water scarcity challenge, promoting the kinds of options that would be needed unless we come forward with something better. I'm sure this will open up all manner of different conversations, both in terms of strategic options, but also smaller scale local options. That means that we can come forward with the right plan that's going to meet everyone's needs. But I guess the main point is the low regret options that we need to pursue in any event, regardless of, almost regardless of different assumptions about climate change, environmental destination, the other factors playing into the plan. Those are the options that we do need to accelerate sooner rather than later, so that we bring those strategic water resources online, because it takes obviously long time to plan and to kind of put these options through the planning system to get them onto the grid. We mustn't delay in getting those low regret options moving, whilst also developing these wider options that could come forward in time. There's a question here from Alice. So I assume it's Alice Green, who I think joined relatively recently the Country Land Business Association. So Alice asks, please could you speak in a bit more detail about how water for agriculture has been approached? And shall I pass that to Jeff or was that for Ben actually? So how have we come together with, first of all, how much water is being used by agriculture at the moment, and how have our projections for agricultural water use being pulled together?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So in terms of current use, that's a mixture of license information, but also abstraction return data. In terms of future use, the projections that we've used rest on some work that Cranfield University did for WRE back in 2018. We produced a couple of reports actually, one looking at current demand and the relationship with things like weather and socioeconomics, and then one looking more at the future. And essentially we've used that information to create sort of growth factors for agricultural demand in future under different scenarios. And then in turn, we've used that information to feed into our kind of multi-sector trade-off process. So there's more work to do on that. I mean, it was a scenario-based study. It was done geographically as well. So we looked at aggregated demand at the CAMS catchment level. But we're developing an application for some funding at the moment to basically refresh those agricultural forecasts.
Yes, Jeff. And it is like when we get into the detail of individual catchments and water resource zones is what we're looking at. And we had a really interesting kind of webinar on Friday, which Kelly took part in, and many others, to really kind of look through the different assumptions for agriculture, and also things like, you know, what scope is there for water efficiency to help manage demand for water for irrigation in future. You know, what scope is there for innovation in drip irrigation, maybe seeing an end to the kind of air cannons and water cannons that you see around the east of England, and to make sure that water agricultural demand is being managed as closely as businesses, households, and everybody else. Next question. Actually, I'll try to turn to this one below from the Cam Valley Forum that's been sitting there for a while. So, will the plan enable us to achieve 60 to 70% reductions in abstraction at the source? I wouldn't necessarily from the Cam Chalk aquifers. I don't think there's anyone from Cambridge Water here. But Luke, did you want to come in and talk about chalk abstraction in general?
Yeah. I mean, I can't speak specifically or more broadly around percentages, 60-70% across all chalk streams, but we have considered all chalk streams in our region, and we have worked with the Environment Agency to determine what are the necessary environmental flows to support a healthy ecology in those chalk streams. So we are building up that picture, and in turn you can start to determine what's the necessary reduction in abstraction required to restore sustainable flows on those chalk streams. So confident that currently we've got a methodology that broadly represents the needs of chalk streams, and then moving forward, I think a really interesting question for WRE, which I think we'll need a compelling answer on, is how quickly can we restore chalk streams relative to reducing abstraction and building new infrastructure and supplies. So, and that's the question we'll probably start to think about in the coming months.
Yeah, now one of the things we're really keen to do is put a kind of time basis to some of the charts that we've been presenting so far. We know potentially what the 2050 picture looks like, but what does it look like in 2030, 2035? At what point will we need to bring some of these reservoirs on stream? At what point will we start to achieve some of these reductions in abstraction and start to deliver those environmental destinations? So that's the environmental ambition work. So how quickly should we get to our environmental destination? Luke, whilst you're on, there's a question here. Where are we going to be getting the water from to fill the reservoirs without affecting the environment? So if we're having to reduce our abstraction, where is this new water going to come from?
Yeah. So I guess in terms of the SLR and the fens, the sources of water we're looking at are the Trent and the Ouse, and just to remember, these are kind of winter storage reservoirs. So typically these, this water will be abstracted at times of high flows, where it's perceived to be more surplus water that's not harmful for the environment. In terms of really understanding what are the environmental flows in these sources of water, we do have bespoke pieces of work looking at modelling that and making sure that we've captured that those requirements, and we're not over abstracting by storing that water. So that's kind of a high level answer, but I don't know, Jeff, if you had anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing to add is that obviously we're looking at some smaller, more local sources of water, sort of with them, South 40-foot drain in the context of the SLR, for example. But yeah, I mean, just to emphasise Luke's point, they are winter storage reservoirs, so the vast majority, if not all of the abstraction, will be from excess flows in winter that the water would otherwise have found its way out into the North Sea. We're not talking about abstracting and derogating flows for the environment.
Yeah, thanks very much. So the next question is, well, again, this is almost like a sensitivity test. So how realistic is it that water companies will achieve that 50% reduction in leakage? That's certainly all water companies committed to. I think it was back in 2019, the public interest commitment. But have you looked at sensitivity testing if they achieve 50, if they achieve 60, or even 40%?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of points on this. So one is that the 50% is an industry target. So water companies collectively have committed to 50% reduction in leakage. Now, if you start looking at that on the basis of individual companies, that starts to get a little bit more challenging. So, for example, for Anglian Water, we already have a very low level of leakage compared to others in the industry. So, for example, the worst performer has twice the amount of leakage that Anglian does. So, in other words, actually 50% for that company, for example, would be just catching up with where Anglian are today. Now, on the flip side, if you look at where Anglian, for example, could go in future, getting down to 50% will become incredibly expensive. I mean, it's not technologically infeasible, but you're starting to talk about very large amounts of mains replacement where the cost will start running into billions, not hundreds of millions. So there's some genuine questions about, what is a fair share of leakage reduction across companies in order to hit that 50% target overall.
Brilliant, Jeff. There's a couple more questions, just looking at the time as well, probably should start to wrap up, but there's a couple of questions here about chalk streams. I was going to bring Julia in on these, particularly in the context of the Norfolk Water Strategy. So which chalk streams have been selected for immediate action? Who decided? So how do we decide to work in Norfolk? And I guess what potential do we, there's a question here as well about the chalk streams in North Hertfordshire, the Ivel, the His, is it? And whether they sit under our plan or the Water Resources South East plan. But yeah, Julia, about how we decided to work in Norfolk and implications for other parts of the region.
So so in terms of working in Norfolk, that's because the different councils, the district and county councils in Norfolk were really keen for this work to take place, and so they have funded a large chunk of the project. They effectively fund my salary for us to work in Norfolk. So that was quite opportunistic. Norfolk has quite a few significant issues in terms of there's been a lot of publicity around water wars and real kind of difficulties for farmers who are having abstraction licenses removed. So we knew there was a high priority area, as where lots of the chalk streams are under threat. So there are other high priority areas within Water Resources East, but basically the funding was available, and we've kind of cracked on with working in that area. There was another question about replication, which I think is relevant here. So everything we're doing on the Norfolk programme, all our methods are being written up in a series of technical reports. Many of the first phase of those will also be available in time for the consultation. So we're tracking everything we do. We're also doing a lot of our research covering England and Wales rather than just Norfolk, to make sure that the processes and the approach that we take can be replicated within other parts of the WRE region or other parts of the UK. And also the water fund model that we're using has already been used in up to 35 other countries around the world. The Nature Conservancy has used that model very successfully to bring in large-scale funding and financing. So the Norfolk pilot is about testing that in Norfolk, and then after that we hope that model will be useful to other parts of the country.
Brilliant. And I don't know, Jeff or Ben, you've got a question, sorry, on the North Hertfordshire chalk streams, unless Julia,
There'll be, if they're catchments tributaries of the Bedford Ouse, which I think those two are, then they're in WRE. If they end up in the Thames ultimately, so if they're in the Lee or one of the other rivers flowing south, then they're in WRSE.
Okay, that's helpful. Well, I say there's loads of other questions here. We probably could have run on for another half an hour, but just for people's diaries, I'm sure they have to start disappearing soon. So Rachel, maybe if you could bring the slides back up, just as a reminder of the consultation exercise that we've got underway. Brilliant. Okay, because I think it does just fall to me to wrap up now. Just got a minute to go until 1:30. I want to thank you all so much for your interest. We've still got way over 100 people taking part in this webinar. Obviously, it's recorded. We'll make that available, and also the questions that we didn't get to on Slido, and we'll pick up the ones from the chat as well, and some have leaked even into the Q&A function as well. We'll try and pull all these questions together and produce a kind of FAQs again, which we'll publish alongside the recording. But to say again, thank you for your interest in our regional plan. We really look forward to seeing your comments through in the next couple of weeks, with the deadline for the 28th. So please just email us if it's easiest, but the survey response form is there to help you structure your answers based on the questions that we've asked. And really just to say, I'm really looking forward to working with you all in the months ahead as we pull together the actual first proper draft of the regional plan in September, alongside the individual water companies developing their plans, and also in the role that I take, chairing individual local groups to try and work through these different issues in a really genuinely collaborative cross-sector way, because we all want the same thing. We all want our rivers to improve. We all want the water to be where it needs to be for the environment, for the different sectors. And Water Resources East is the organisation for the East of England that's going to make that happen. So, so thank you again for your interest. I look forward to working with you, and I'll close it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.